My name is Erin Reed. I am the marketing manager for Polaris MEP. And Polaris MEP is a nonprofit consultancy that works with small and medium-sized manufacturers in Rhode Island to help them be more competitive and more sustainable. We're actually part of a NIST national network of MEP centers. We are the Center for Rhode Island, and there's one in every state plus one in Puerto Rico, which gives us a local expertise and support, but also a national and even international reach. Today's presentation is going to be about the new DFARS Interim rules. And this is sponsored by NERDIC, which is the New England Regional Defense Industry Collaboration. Now, NERDIC includes the 6 New England MEP centers that I just described, and we work with companies that are within the Department of Defense supply chain. And what we're really trying to do is make sure that you have the information and support that you need to continue to support our warfighters, to comply with the rules that have been set out by the defense supply chain and their groups, and also to make sure that you have the support in keeping things moving forward so that you can go ahead. For the first 40 minutes, you are going to hear from our presenter, Jean Lehman. And Jean is going to provide some insights and resources that will help you protect your contracts and make sure that you're following the regulations that have been set forth. And this is obviously a really critical part to making sure that you're continuing to maintain and or grow your business within that DoD supply chain. There will be time for questions and answers. So please, if you haven't already figured out where the chat feature is, this is what the control panel looks like on Zoom. If you use that chat feature that we've outlined in the box there, you can let me know if you're having problems with audio, if you can't see something or hear something, and you can ask me those questions that are really important to helping your team move forward and take the steps that they need for this DFARS interim rule and all of the regulations. And with that, one more slide, and it will be my pleasure to officially introduce Jean Lehman. Jean is a cybersecurity expert who is specialist for our NIST programs that have to do with cybersecurity and defense here at Polaris MEP. What she really does is help manufacturing clients in Rhode Island and other companies throughout New England navigate the DoD, the DFARS, the NIST, and the cybersecurity. And with that, Jean, I'll let you take it away.
So today we're talking about the interim rule and how we're continuing on our path to cybersecurity maturity under DFARS. And so I've got this bridge graphic here to communicate where we're at with the interim rule and what it's really doing. And that's bringing us from where we're at currently with DFARS up to eventually the full CMMC rollout. So right now, we have the current DFARS safeguarding information clauses, primarily 252, 204, 7012, and 7008. And we're at a self-attestation point, which has, for a lot of our manufacturers, meant simply saying, yes, I'm doing that. Right now, it's expected that you have plans of action for unimplemented requirements and system security plans. The interim rule does 2 things. It introduces DoD assessments, and it introduces the start of the phased rollout of CMMC. So under the DoD assessments, there's self-reported scores and phased-in certification requirements under CMMC. And then as we move into the future, we'll have full implementation of all requirements under the CMMC, as well as additional requirements of CMMC. This interim rule was published in the Federal Register on September 29th and goes into effect on November 30th. And it will be included in clauses other than COTS at that date. In order to implement a phased rollout of CMMC, the inclusion of that CMMC requirement in a solicitation during the time period from November 30th of 2020 to September 30th of 2025 will actually require approval from the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. So there really is some control on how that gets rolled out. And then as of October 1st of 2025, the CMMC requirement will be included in all contracts that aren't COTS. So as a quick review, we've got our current requirements, 252, 7008, saying you accept a contract that includes these clauses, you're representing that you're complying with these clauses. And 7012, which is not going away, it's still in the DFARS, and really the new requirements are additive to this. This is the base underneath which those two rules follow, or the three new rules follow. And these are the requirements that you should already be doing. So adequate security, NIST SP 80171, cyber incident reporting capabilities, and subcontractor flow down, as well as the federal acquisition regulation for basic safeguarding of covered contractor information, which has 15 requirements outlined in it. Those map directly to the NIST 800-171, 17 items within there. There are some clear business risks associated with non-compliance with the contract requirements. This particular list is from the DoD's frequently asked questions on cybersecurity, and the question was consequences of non-compliance, and it notes basically that the introduction of the DFARS 7012 clause didn't change the existing penalties or remedies for non-compliance under contract requirements. And then they updated it further this summer, adding to this this list of potential consequences, noting depending on the contract terms and factual circumstances on a contract-by-contract basis, the government may consider the following actions in the event that a contractor fails to comply with terms and conditions. So there's a wide range of potential consequences, and we do know of at least one False Claims Act that was in the news last year. If you want to see the details on that, you can search Aerojet Rocketdyne. And the interim rule itself even calls out the urgency to implement the current requirements, emphasizing that deficiencies related to 7012 should be corrected right now. So what's the purpose of the interim rule? This is the summary. They're issuing this interim rule to implement the DoD Assessment Methodology and the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Framework to assess contractor implementation of cybersecurity requirements and enhance protection of unclassified information within the supply chain. So what's the bottom line in the interim rule? We've got 3 new contract clauses that are part of the interim rule. There's also requirements on the acquisition side, but for the contractors, there's 3 new contract clauses, and 7019 and 7020 bring the DoD Assessment Methodology requirements into the DFARS, and 7021 is what introduces the CMMC. You have to have a system security plan under NIST SP 800-171 in order to have a score under the DoD Assessment Methodology. So and this is in the assessment methodology itself, this is the quote: the absence of a system security plan would result in the finding that assessment can't be completed due to non-compliance with the DFARS clause. And the expectation here under the interim rule is you're going to provide an accurate assessment score and an accurate estimated date of completion of all the requirements, and close your gaps and implement as soon as possible. Regarding the estimated date of completion, the director of the DIBCAT was recommending specifically that companies be honest and conservative. DoD has been actively pursuing false claims and can sue for up to 3 times the contract amount. So if you put in a completion date of June 2021 and it's really February 22, that could be considered a false claim. He also said that if a company needs to adjust their POAM completion date, it should be downward sooner rather than upward later. Can update in the reporting system that we'll talk about, you can update your timeframes. You can go back in and update your scores and update your timeframes. But overall, be realistic about how long remediating all of your unimplemented requirements will take, and perhaps push out the date a little further than you think you need. So the DoD Assessment Methodology, and DoD has been assessing under this methodology, but the introduction of this in the DFARS allows them to go a little bit further with it. The scoring methodology is this. You start with 110 points, and then they start deducting for each unimplemented requirement. And there's a total of about 313 points, so you can end up in the negative. So we have 5-point items, and those are considered to lead to significant exploitation of the network or exfiltration of DoD CUI. 3 points have a specific and confined effect, and 1 point is a limited or indirect effect. There are a couple of unique scores. There are 2 requirements that they provided a stepped scoring for. That is multi-factor authentication. So if you haven't implemented multi-factor authentication at all, it's a -5. If you've implemented multi-factor authentication for remote access and privileged users, then it's only a -3. And the other is the FIPS validated encryption requirement. And that, again, is -5 if you don't have encryption, and -3 if you've implemented encryption, but it's not FIPS validated. And the assessment methodology document has detailed guidance on all of the requirements. So under the first subcontract, the first clause that we'll talk about here is 7020. And we've got the DoD assessment. Both 7019 and 7020 are similarly labeled. 7020 says you've got to provide access to your facilities, systems, and personnel. And you've got to post your summary level scores in the supplier performance risk system. And it identifies the information that must be posted with those scores. It provides a meaning for the basic, medium, and high assessments, and it introduces a flow down to subcontracts for this requirement. It does also note that you will be able to view your own score in the supplier performance risk system. And the reason that that note is there is so if you had the DoD come in and the DoD came in and did an assessment of you, and they enter your score, if they did the assessment, you would be able to view that in the system. So flow down, similar but not exactly the same as flow down in 7012. You're responsible for verifying that your subs have reported an assessment in Spurs prior to subcontract award. So you cannot award the subcontract or other contractual instrument unless the contractor has completed the basic NIST SP 800-171 DoD assessment. These are the 3 assessment levels. The confidence level is low, medium, and high. The names are basic, medium, and high. So the basic assessment, which is the contractor self-assessment, represents a low confidence level. Medium and high are assessments conducted by DoD, and the name of them reflects the confidence level. So we've got DoD reviews of, it all starts with your basic assessment. You're going to have to do a basic assessment no matter what. You're going to do your own assessment. At the medium level, DoD is going to look at that. There's some interviews, discussion, clarification. At the high level, on-site and or now virtual validation and documentation. So 7012's basic assessment is based on your contractor review of your system security plans associated with the covered contractor information systems, conducted in accordance with the NIST SP 800-171 DoD Assessment Methodology, and again results in a low confidence level because it's a self-generated score. Medium or high assessments, they start by reviewing your contractor basic assessment and discussions with you and review of some documents. The high, there's a lot higher scrutiny on. The clause provides that you have 14 days to rebut the score. I will say that there's a relatively low number of small entities that the interim rule suggests will undergo medium or high DoD assessments, on the order of 148 medium and 81 high. So I would imagine that those are going to be fairly targeted assessments. Clause 7019, that provides that you have to have a current assessment prior to contract award, and current is defined as within the last 3 years. Those summary level scores have to be posted in the supplier performance risk system, which you'll hear referred to as Spurs. If you do not go in and enter it yourself, you can email, and the interim clause provides the method by which you can email and what you need to email. But you can also go log in and enter your information yourself. And the scores will be posted are to be posted within 30 days after your assessment. And I do have some links at the end to bring you to Spurs, but it's also linked within the interim rule itself. So what's the information to be posted in Spurs? So it's the version of NIST SP 800-171 that you've assessed against. So revision 1, revision 2. It's the organization conducting the assessment. So in the instance of a basic assessment, that's you, the contractor. In the instance of a medium or high assessment, it's the DCMA or some other DoD entity. You're supposed to include all associated cage codes for each system security plan. If you have more than one system security plan, there's actually a format under which you're supposed to submit the information for each plan. That's outlined in the interim rule. The date the assessment was completed, and if it was a medium or a high assessment conducted by DoD, then they're required to say whether it was medium or high. Your summary level score. So they're not looking for each requirement score, they're just looking for your total. And the date that all requirements are expected to be implemented based on the associated plans of action. So that's where I was saying you want to be conservative in terms of giving yourself enough time to implement. I pulled a couple of samples of prime contractor notification excerpts that talk about what their expectations are. There's one that's General Dynamics Mission Systems and Raytheon's regulatory alert to their suppliers. And the gist is they're all telling you to get on this and get your scores entered into the system, because they're not going to be able to issue you awards under these RFPs and RFIs unless you've got a score posted in Spurs. I did look at one more from Northrop Grumman, and it says, to avoid disruptions to your future business, contractors need to begin taking the following actions immediately. Ensure that you have a current DoD assessment score in Spurs. Address the additional CMMC practices and processes now. Provide status to Lockheed Martin, and they have sent out a survey asking for confirmation of NIST SP 800-171 assessment scores in Spurs and estimated completion dates for unimplemented requirements of the NIST SP 800-171 requirements, as well as estimated completion dates for the additional 20 level 2 and 3 CMMC practices and the level 2 and 3 CMMC maturity processes. So they're actually looking for some insight, not just into how you're scoring on NIST SP 800-171, but how quickly you plan to get up to speed on CMMC. And their letter notes that they're anticipating seeing CMMC requirements in RFIs, RFPs, and contracts in late 2020 and early 2021. So here we are. So cybersecurity maturity model certification, it's phased rollout. And as I said before, Until September 30th of 2025, the inclusion in a contract has to be approved by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. And certainly right now, part of that's tied into the relatively low number of assessors that have been trained so far to do these assessments. Contracting officers will not make an award or exercise an option on a contract if the offeror does not have a current certification for the required CMMC level. The flow down is based on the sensitivity of the unclassified information flowed down to each subcontractor, which it occurs to me that particular sentence doesn't really tell you much. The gist of that is this. They may flow, the prime may have a CMMC Level 3 contract, but the information that gets flowed down to the supplier may be deemed a CMMC Level 1, in which case the subcontractor would get flowed down at CMMC Level 1 based on that information they're receiving. And after 10/1/2025, it's going to apply to all contracts, all commercial items valued at greater than the micro purchase threshold, which is currently $10,000, excluding exclusively commercial off-the-shelf item. This is a little bit about kind of the process of how the CMMC certification process works functionally. So under 7021, the requirement is you shall have a current CMMC certificate at the level required by the contract, and that you will maintain it for the required level for the duration of the contract, as well as inserting the substance of the clause. So this is the flow down again. You're inserting the substance and you're not awarding unless somebody meets that CMMC level. But how that's going to work is it's going to be valid for 3 years from the date of certification. You've got to have it in place prior to the award. These assessments are going to be conducted by the C3PAOs, Certified Third-Party Assessing Organizations, which are accredited by the CMMC AB, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Accrediting Body. These assessing organizations will provide their assessment reports to the accrediting body. The accrediting body will maintain and store those reports. They will issue the certificates upon resolution of any disputes and anomalies. And my understanding is there's going to be 90 days to cure on those. And the CMMC certificates will be distributed to the contractor. And my understanding is that the accrediting body will will post those scores into Spurs. So here's the rollout. And this is actually in the interim rule. And what you can see here is that they only expect the CMMC to be rolled out in about 1,100 to about 1,100 small entities over the course of the first year. So this is specifically for small entities. The total number is higher, but for small entities, this is what they've charted out. So there is a fairly slow rollout here, and you'll notice in the initial years, there's no activity on levels 4 and 5 at all. So what's the purpose of these levels? You've got your basic level where you're performing requirements, your intermediate level where it's documented, level 3 where it's managed. 4 and 5 are considered more advanced to deal with advanced persistent threat type issues. And there are some fairly sophisticated requirements associated with that. Level 1 is basic safeguarding of the requirements from the FAR Clause 52-204-21. That's what level 1 is. CMMC level 1 basically is saying do the things that have been in effect as a rule since 2016. Level 2 is kind of considered an intermediary step for contractors that are trying to get to level 3 certification. It's part of the security requirements from NIST 800-171 with a few additional CMMC practices and a couple of processes. Level 3 is where we expect most manufacturers will be at that are working in defense, because you're getting plans from DoD that identify, ITAR, that identify specific technical information. So we consider it likely that most of the manufacturers will land in this space, unless there is some major de-identification effort that starts happening, which I haven't seen or heard anything about that. So reasonable for us to expect that those of you who are handling controlled and classified information now will be required to get to level 3. And at level 3, you've got all of the NIST SP 800-171 requirements, plus 20 additional CMMC practices and some additional processes. 4 and 5 really are next level and will require a significant investment. Speaking of investments, please take a look at the interim rule on pages 10 and 11. They've included some costs for estimates for certification, and take a look at the assumptions that they're making there. One of the assumptions that jumps out basically is that the contractor has already implemented all of the existing NIST SP 800-171 requirements. So their estimates of cost here don't include any of the associated costs with that implementation. So next steps, you want to enter an accurate score into Spurs. Review your plan of action and milestones and work to implement or close your gaps. Budgeting and planning for implementation and future certification prep, so that you're prepared for what these costs are going to look like. And you can make your decisions based on what you see there. Work towards CMMC Level 1. They're saying that 60% of all contracts will only require Level 1. And while we understand that 30% are going to have to be at Level 3 because they handle CUI, perhaps there'll be some effort to de-identify that might put you into a space where you could do some CMMC Level 1 work if you're not going to get to CMMC Level 3. Call us if you need help. I'm happy to talk through with you any issues that you're having and try to get you the help that you need or provide it to you. If you're working on policies and developing your maturity, you're working on your assessment, you're still working on your system security plan, I'm happy to help you. And talk with your contracting officers or your supply chain managers to see if they're looking for some dates in particular for targets for you to be at a certain point in terms of implementation or certification, or minimum scores that aren't published in the documentation. There's nothing here that says the contracting officers are going to be looking for a score of X, but that doesn't mean that they aren't setting some requirements on their own contracts, or they're not being published, and you might want to ask so that you can be prepared to meet what your customers would like. I have a couple of resources here that are included, and when Erin sends a presentation out, those links will be active, so you'll be able to click to those links. But I've linked to the interim rule, which is pretty dense. When they put it in the Federal Register, they put it in 3 columns. Before they put it in the Federal Register and they printed it published it as a preliminary document, it was 90 pages. But if you skip to the last couple of pages, that's where your contractor clauses are. But all the details about costs and so forth come up before that, and a fairly detailed discussion. The DoD Assessment Methodology, there's a link here for that. If you need help with that, let me know. Protecting controlled and classified information, the current revision of 800-171. The quick entry guide for Spurs, which I can try to pull, I'll try to pull it up here. I have to switch my screen to do that. As well as links to the CMMC information, the model information at the DoD's acquisition website and the CMMC accrediting body website.
Jean, we also have some questions for you.
I figured that. I was kind of glad that I was targeting that I wouldn't go too long with this because I thought I'd have some questions. Yep. But I just wanted to pull this up to point out that there's some specific information here for help posting. So if you click on this, it's going to bring you to that link that I've got in the presentation on how to get in and enter your own score into Spurs. I had some feedback that some folks had trouble with it. And I do actually have some tips on that I can provide if somebody needs it. Send me a note and I'll send it. Eugene Jones from Purdue was kind enough to provide me with some materials from one of his presentations. And I've pulled from that a particular tip sheet that he's got on entering your information in there. So with that, Erin, what do you got for questions?
So I got a couple of questions, but I'm so glad that you were able to work with Purdue, because that's an example of how our MEP national network is working together, not just the 6 MEPs that are part of NERDIC, but also across the country to try to make this process a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, and it actually, I'll give a plug for Purdue's has been running for several weeks now, a series called 20 in 20. And their objective is to cover all of the CMMC Level 1 requirements in some detail, with some presenters talking about specific solutions and targeting, in some instances, some of the free solutions that are out there to help a company meet those requirements. So by all means, those recordings are available, and the events are ongoing. We've linked some of those events on our event page, but they've also recorded those events, and they're available if people want to look back at a topic they may have missed.
Absolutely. And that is 20 cyber topics in 20 weeks. And as you said, at polarismep.org/events, you'll find a listing of several of the upcoming ones. And if you just click on that link, you'll get not only to what's coming forward, but also some of those recordings looking back. It's as you said, a really nice way to be able to kind of go requirement by requirement and get some things moving forward. So we do have some questions, and the first one kind of relates, I think, to what you were just talking about with CMMC Level 1 versus higher levels. And the question is, we are a small business. We do not deal with CUI right now, but we do follow all the cybersecurity standards. How do we start to get the NIST compliance? Most of the requirements of NIST 800-171 are not applicable to us, and we worry this will reduce our overall score.
I'm going to start with not applicable and work my way backwards. So not applicable, if it is truly something that doesn't apply to your system, from a NIST 800-171 standpoint, if it's not applicable, and I'll give this example, there are requirements that are specific to protecting Wi-Fi and controlling access, right? Let's say you don't have Wi-Fi. You're all laughing, but I did actually talk to somebody who didn't have Wi-Fi at the time that we were having this conversation. So it's not applicable. Or say remote access. Say you're not doing remote access, you've got everything locked down. You're going to document why that particular requirement isn't applicable to you. And maybe the expectation would be, depending on what the requirement is, you might have to write a policy for it. But if it's truly not applicable, the DoD guidance on that is you document that in your system security plan. And what's more, when it comes to the DoD assessment methodology and scoring, you're not subtracting for those requirements that are not applicable.
So it won't reduce your overall score because you've said you've considered what the requirement is, it's in your SSP, you've addressed it, and you can move forward. Yes?
I didn't want you to echo. Can you repeat that question?
Sure. Just to confirm that if you have sections that are truly not applicable, it won't reduce your overall score because you've addressed that in your SSP, you've explained why it's not applicable, so it's not points taken away.
Correct.
Okay, excellent. So the next question that came along was, do we have to use a specific format for the IT SSP, or can we use our own custom format?
So the short answer is there's no prescribed format. There is, however, a template you can use, and the requirement itself specifies certain information needs to be included. And so the DoD's assessment methodology and some other guidance that DoD have published also express that they want specific components to be included in that. So for the most part, I'd say if you looked at the requirement language, 3.12.4, you're going to see it's going to say include this, include this, include this. And so you want to incorporate those items. But if whoever asked that question wants to call me, I will connect you to those specific resources that you can look at to see some templates. The gist of it is you want to make sure that you're saying how you're meeting each one of the 110 requirements. You want certain descriptions about your system, inventory, network diagram, and you may choose to incorporate those as links or incorporate them by reference, but they are expected to be part of your plan. So if you want me to point you to some resources on that, send me a note or give me a call and I'm happy to help with that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jean. The next question is about the Spurs. Can you update Spurs? How often can you update Spurs?
I don't think there's a limit on how often you can update it. You probably want to update if you've made some advances on your implementation and your score has improved or your timeline has improved. You may want to include it so that if you have contracting officers looking at you as a potential resource and you don't know it, and they've got some score that we don't know about that they're targeting, you know, maybe it puts you into consideration rather than out of consideration. So I would certainly update if you have the opportunity to.
Excellent. The next question is also related to Spurs. Do subcontractors have to use Spurs, or is that for prime only?
Subs have to use it too.
Subs have
the flow down requirement here. And if you look, honestly, if you look at the comments that all of the primes are making, it's clear they're expecting that you follow that and get your scores in.
And that makes sense that they would want the subs to enter their own, be accountable for their own score.
Yeah, and as you flow it down, you're actually responsible to make sure that your subs have put their scores in Spurs as well.
Well, what an interesting thing, because the next question relates to that. Does the assessment methodology Spurs only apply to vendors that you share CUI with? So we're back to CUI.
Yes.
Yes, it only applies to people who you share CUI with?
Yep.
Okay, good to know. The next
if you've got an ability to sanitize the information that you're pushing down, then that's great, but I'd make sure that you're doing that at the direction or with the approval of your customers, that you're not running into a violation of some issue with ITAR if you take the information out of there and it's no longer marked as ITAR, even though they consider it ITAR. There's some specific demarking requirements that you'll want to make sure that you've got guidance from that, guidance from your contracting officers and your suppliers, or your customers rather, before you go there.
I believe you talked about marking and demarking in one of our previous webinars. So if there's somebody who's on the line today who was not part of the previous sessions, please go to polarismep.org and you'll find recordings of that might give you a little bit of a head start. And of course, call Jean if you need some clarification on that.
Yeah, just a little bit about those recordings. One recording is kind of a basic overview on DFARS 7012, and the second is on some of the sticky issues of cloud computing and its impacts when you're trying to get through DFARS 7012. So feel free to look those up, and if you have any questions on them, let me know.
Excellent. Thank you, Jean. All right, this one is a little bit more of a complex challenge. We are a member of a global company. Coordination has been difficult within the existing documentation. Have you seen any guidance? And specifically, they said that there have been many IT consolidations, and now we see references that sometimes state non-US citizens can still work on the projects, and then other times say no non-US citizens can ever see any system that relates to NIST, DFARS, ITAR.
Well, I would think that's true, that non-US persons wouldn't be allowed to access ITAR information. that with a lot of if you have multiple systems and multiple locations and consolidations and whatnot, what you're going to want to look at, because what these requirements call out is specifically the systems that contain CUI. I'm going to clarify that statement. I'm going to say store, process, or transmit. And so the way to perhaps simplify that in a multinational would be to dial down where that stuff is located and limit who has access to that particular system. Because you only have to submit plans for the systems that are holding, processing, transmitting that information.
The CUI.
Unless you're tagged as operationally critical support, which is a whole other kettle of fish.
Love it. Another question about CUI. Is there a mapping from DoD distribution types, A, F, et cetera, to CUI, or are they separate?
There is a map. What was the last part? Distribution types?
Yeah, is there a mapping from DoD distribution types? So I guess there's a distribution type A, F, et cetera. And is there a mapping from that DoD distribution type to CUI?
Oh, if you look at this NARA.gov, NARA.gov /CUI, that's the CUI registry, you'll see within the discussion of there's like categories, and you'll see defense information and controlled technical information. And I want to say that it's distribution statements B through F are CUI, and A is not. And I think the ones you'd only be likely to see are D, C, and D. I could be wrong about that, but that's just off the top of my head. But there is a delineation of which distribution statements are considered CUI, and I think it's B through F or B through G.
Excellent. I can add that to the email that we send out after this. That will
Sure.
include the copy of the deck as well. So folks, if you can, please get any last minute questions in through chat. And if you've got a question from me to confirm some information about you, to make sure you get that follow-up deck, if you could please address that, we'd really appreciate it. Jean, while we're waiting for any last questions, do you have any last bits of advice or thoughts to send people forward?
Yes, my last thought and my consistent message here is this is not an IT problem. This is a wholesale change in your business practices and a change in culture to make security foundational to your business. And as you move into the maturity processes, that's really what it's expecting you to demonstrate, that at all levels of the organization, you're involved in this and you're planning for it, preparing for it, reacting to it. And there are a lot of levels where management and operations have to be involved. It is not something that you can kick to your IT department and tell them to take care of.
No, it's not a one and done either. I think that's what we've clearly heard from you throughout.
The maturity process, it's bringing you into a state of, we'll call it continuous improvement over time, and the ability to adapt to the risks as they adapt.
So I'm reminded, for many of the manufacturers on this call, it's PDCA, plan, do, check, act. Plan, do, check, act. And we don't stop the cycle, we keep moving forward with it. Excellent. All right, Jean, if you wouldn't mind advancing just so everybody can have the updated information about how to reach you. And I'm going to say thank you on behalf of Polaris MEP and also NERDIC, and remind you that your local MEP is here to help. If it's not one of these 6 MEPs within the New England area, please check out NIST.gov and look at what the MEP is to make sure that you find your local center. I think one more slide and we'll have your email and information, Jean, or at least your phone number, so that if people do have questions, we please urge you to call our agrarian cybersecurity expert. And I thank you, Jean Lehman, and everybody for participating today.
Thanks everybody for joining us.